Okay, folks, we're going to finish up with part three. This is not going to be some hour-long thing. We're going to just finish up with this and so on. And it's kind of weird that we're talking about this right in the smack dab in the middle of what's going on. But that's how things are, right? That's how life is, a major series of coincidences. Okay. We were talking about like these problems that start hitting the 1300s. The Mongol attacks on trades are screwing that up. One of the big ones was the Great Famine, right, of 1315, caused by the Little Ice Age. Move that so you can actually see it. There we go. Caused by the Little Ice Age. But the biggest one, the biggest event that happened, and like I said, there are certain events that are really civilization defining or human defining, okay? Not just like region or like, oh, this is like part of the history of this country or something like that. No, it is something that is still talked about now because it has such a guiding change, such an impact on so many people, It wasn't like it just affected a few or even one kingdom. It affected so many people, okay? And that is obviously what has been called the Black Death, or certain Swedish metal bands. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351. What the heck is the Black Death, and how the heck did it get to Europe, and what was going on, and why did it kill so many people? Remember, folks, this is a time period that even though these people are doing very well, we would still consider these people extremely primitive when it came to science and technology. Just even a 10-year-old now has more rudimentary medical information than a doctor, a healer did back in the year 1347. These people have no concept or no understanding of anything that they can't see, and anything that they can't see or understand is attributed to faith, attributed to religion. Whatever I understand, I can put it into the realm of it's meant for me not to understand. It's something to do with God or religion, whatever it might be. And this big thing, it hits them like a hammer to the back of the head. There was no way they could have prevented this. There was no way they could have fought against it. They didn't even know what it was, and it just had to run its course. And unfortunately, it did. And at the end of it, a lot of people were dead. And we have an entire transformation of European society, of civilization, okay? So the Black Death hits in 1347, 1351. The Black Death is quite simply this little thing here. It is a bacterium. It's a bacteria, and the Latin is called Yersinia pestis, or Y. pestis, and it is a bacteria. Here it is, okay? Something that these people at that time had never seen. They had no technology to see it. They did not understand, or would they even grasp the concept that this little tiny thing that is so small that you can't even see with the human eye is the thing that is multiplying by the billions in your body and destroying you and killing you, okay? How is this bacteria transmitted? It is transmitted through these little wonderful things, not wonderful things. It's about 1 millimeter across, and this is a common flea. Now, a flea is not picky. In the modern age, we have developed cleanliness and sanitary concerns, so most people are not running around with fleas on them. However, in the Middle Ages, it was very, very common for people to have fleas, okay? Not just animals, but people to have fleas, okay? When you have a bath maybe a couple times a year, it is common for your body to be extremely dirty. That's just how life was back in the day. But not so much just your body, but your clothing, okay? These people are not sending their stuff down to the laundromat to get it dry cleaned. You only have a certain amount of clothing and you can't afford to lose it or have it destroyed in the wash or something like that, or even wash it, to take time to wash it. You got to get out there and work in your fields. So where were these fleas living? They were living in the creases of these people's clothes, and then they were moving to the nice spots where people are warm. So like in their groin area, underneath in their armpits, in their neck area. The more hair you had, the easier it was for the fleas to live, and so on. Oftentimes people would take like their jackets or their clothes, they would take it to like a bonfire and get as close as they could without burning it up. And what would happen, the fleas would literally like pop off, right? They would pop, they would burn and sizzle away because they were being cooked. And then you'd be good for a little while, but you would get fleas again. And plus, people were living in such close proximity to animals. The common flea doesn't care about what blood it's sucking, okay? It sucks down the blood of mammals. So whether that mammal is a goat, a chicken, a cow, or a guy in his field, it doesn't care. It just knows that it needs to feed. And so what it does is it hops on you, it sinks its teeth in, it sucks out that blood, and if your blood is filled with that Y. pestis, it now has that inside of it, okay? It pops off, it goes to maybe another host, right? Because it's a parasite, and that host might be you, and then it sinks its teeth into you, and part of that is regurgitated. Whatever it had for dinner before is partly regurgitated back into your bloodstream, and while it's feeding from you, and imagine that, now you're infected again, okay? What was the main vector for this Yersinia pestis? This was the thing that was transporting it and moving it from host to host, but what was the main vector? What was the thing, how it was going so quickly? And that was these little guys, the common house rat, the common rat, okay, or mice. Okay, remember I told you, these people lived in a society where you saw them everywhere, okay? Their rats and mice were everywhere. Wherever there's people, and this is how it's been since the beginning of time, wherever there's people, there's food. Whenever there's food and waste, there's rats and mice. They've become symbiotic with humanity, okay? Rats and mice. That's why we started having cats around, because why else do you have a cat around? All the cat people got mad. I lost my cat. He's my companion. Okay, great. That's awesome. But cats are cats, and there you go. But why do we have them around? To eat rats and mice, okay? These things spread, right? They have fleas all over them. They're dirty little animals, just like the people were dirty little animals too back then. They spread it, okay? So how did it get spread? You're going to be watching a really neat video about this, but it basically comes in, it originates in Asia, the bacterium. They don't know specifically how it got out, okay? It wasn't like it was manufactured in some laboratory or something like that. They believe that it was just lying dormant in like the local field population of mice and rats. Something happened to disturb this population. It went along the trade routes, like we saw the Silk Road. It took years and years and years. It was nothing new. The Black Death was nothing new to the people over here, but eventually it makes it to the trade routes, because now, remember, there's an opening between East and West. It makes it to the trade routes here in the northern part of the Black Sea to this place here. So this is the Crimea Peninsula. And right there, the largest city in the Crimean Peninsula is a place called Kaffa. And Kaffa had been a trading area for a long, long time. Even the Greeks, going back 1,500 years, were trading up there. Well, you'll see in the video exactly how it makes it onto these sailors, which is very interesting. But this Black Death, and the fancy name for it is called the bubonic plague. It ends up on these sailors here. They take it, they land in Sicily, all along the route, okay? So you can see it hits Constantinople almost first, because it's easily spread, because what is on every ship, just like now? Rats and mice, okay? You can try and get rid of them, but they're always there. And when they dock in Sicily, the people see that the sailors are dying, and so they don't let the sailors off the ship. They're like, no, they don't know what's going on, but they know that they're dying. They don't let them off the ship. They let them die on the ship. but the damage is already done because unfortunately they've let them moor to the port. And what is crossing those ropes? Little rats, little mice going from the ship, and those rats and mice are all filled up with these fleas that are all filled up with this bacteria of the bubonic plague, okay? And then slowly, it emanates out from Southern Europe. It slowly spreads across all of Europe and North Africa, and it lays waste, folks. It lays waste to the population, okay? These people, like I said, have no ability to stop it. There's no such thing as vaccinations. There's no such things as, treatments. This is a virulent, highly contagious disease, okay? It lays waste to entire families. Like one day, this whole family down the street is fine, and by the end of the week, no joke, no exaggeration, by the end of the week, they're all dead. They're being carted out. They're all dead. What happens is when you first contract it, you start getting like a fever. You start getting, your skin turns a little black. You start getting, your blood is almost coagulating inside of your body. It's not freely moving. You're losing oxygen to your cells, so your skin is turning a darker color. And then by the second or third day, you start developing these big boils all over your body. And these boils come, the name for these boils comes from Latin, it's called a bubo. And they appear all over your body, but where they first start appearing is your lymphatic system, okay? So they're appearing like in your groin area, in your neck, your underarms, and so on, okay? They're affecting that part of your body. You're laid down, you can't do anything. You can't eat, you can't drink, and the people that are in there to help you, well, they're gonna contract it as well too. They're gonna get it too, because if you're sitting there sneezing and coughing, and that stuff's coming out, it's floating around in the air, and you're gonna get it, okay, if you're there helping them. So oftentimes these people are left to their own devices because it starts destroying the communities. Everybody hears these tales of this horrible contagion, this plague, and this is, like I said, this is a time period where these people have dealt with plagues before and disease, and they have their remedies of what they need to do. But this one is new. It's far different. It doesn't matter. It's killing everybody. It doesn't matter if you're rich, if you're poor. Now, if you're rich, you have the benefit of being able to leave, right? Like the city or the place where you go, and go far away from other people. You can go to like your other homes or something like that. But eventually it will catch up to you. This contagion, the Black Death, gets so bad that entire villages are quarantined under penalty of death. Like the king or whatever might stick, guards in a radius around this village if like everybody in the village has it. So nobody can come in, nobody can come out, and the people just die. This is well before a modern structure of a social safety net. Okay, they're not sending in frontline troops. They're not sending in doctors and nurses to help with this. Who are the people that are helping with it? Usually the healers, but oftentimes the healers are the first ones that are the second ones going. But they're also relying on the church. And so you have very intrepid, very good church people, like the local priest who's going in there. He's administering to the poor. They're all poor at this point. They're all dying at this point. He's doing what he can. Unfortunately, he will probably contract it too, or maybe even like the sisters that are helping him, the nuns that are helping him. And so this lays waste to not just one kingdom. It spares no one, folks. It wipes out entire populations, okay? And for 4 long years, it makes its way north and spreads throughout. So all of Europe, to a large degree, is destroyed by this plague. What's interesting is that this area in Poland is largely untouched. There's not that much that hits it. And different scholars and different scientists have done studies on this. Why is it that it's not like a little city, but a huge section of Poland didn't really get affected by it? Well, to a large degree, it was because it was so sparsely settled. There weren't that many people as compared to like France or England or Spain. But there's other, they haven't come down with a specific idea yet. There's a lot of different theories about why that happened. But for the most part, it does wipe out all these places. Okay, it just lays waste to entire kingdoms, folks, entire villages. It's estimated that between that over 1/4 of the population, so over 25% of the entire population of Europe dies. Okay, so that means that between 30 and 38 million people succumb to this disease. It just people start dying so fast that they run out of places to bury them. You can't just go dig one individual grave for a person because there's 10,000 more people lined up behind him that are now dead. So they start digging what's called plague pits. They will dig out a giant pit, and they will, toss the bodies into the plague pit and cover it up, and then dig another one. And they still find them now. It's crazy. They'll be digging like a new subway system or whatever in a European country, and you'll come across a bone, and pretty soon you find out that there's just bones of hundreds of people, because these people unfortunately died in either this plague or another one like it. There's nothing like this one, but there were plagues that hit routinely, throughout the Middle Ages, throughout, Roman times, anything. Once again, disease always wipes out way more people than war. But you find it. I'm not going to go into the discussion of the ramifications of the plague, because it's part of your question that you're answering in your turned-in question. But we will be talking about it next week, because it is very, 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 very important. All the ramifications of this plague, of this spreading of this disease, and what it does to European society. So we will be talking about it next week. Okay. All right, folks. So moving on very quickly. Oh, I forgot about this. I don't want to get too much into this, because once again, it is a example of how things change. But we see a lot of differences, because people are going to the church saying, why am I, why are people dying? Church leaders have no more answers than the other guy in the street, regular guy in the street. As just because you're a high-ranking member of the church in the year 1300 doesn't mean you have any more knowledge about science than the next guy. And we'll talk about this next week. So the answer is always from the church, well, it's God's will. God has wanted this to be done for whatever reason. Well, people start to question that. And they're like, well, I don't understand. Why would God want something like this? Why would God want to see entire villages laid waste? Why did, I can understand if, this guy down the street who was, a killer, he wasn't a good guy, if he, God killed him, but why did God, kill off, my 2 children, my 6 and my 4-year-old, what did they do wrong? And so this really starts to put a strain on the church to provide answers, especially the higher ups in the church, provide answers. Why is this happening? So we'll talk about that next week, okay? And we'll explain what's going on in this drawing, okay? All right. Oh, there you go. It's an example of a plague pit. Like I said, they find them all the time. Very sad. They just toss them. And some places, like in Paris, they even ran out of actual places to stick them. So they were just tossing them into like the river Seine. And just, you can imagine the horror show that would have been. Bodies kind of getting lodged up against rocks and whatever, just sitting there. It got to be a pretty desperate time for most people. Okay. All right. Okay. So the final major thing that happens in the 14th century, and this seems like, well, wait, isn't this always happening? But the thing that really kicks people in the teeth is that politics really stops for nothing, even when it comes to quarantines and viruses and disease. And so during the 14th century, instead of people like, well, let's just focus on this major thing that's hitting us and killing everybody, they're still doing, kings were still doing what they wanted to do. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to start wars and fight for more land and for more territory, because we, remember, land is scarce, and you have to take what you don't have. You have to take from somebody else for money, for more power, whatever it might be. In the 1300s, this started in the 1200s, but it can be traced all the way back to the time of William the Conqueror. So remember, William the Conqueror, who took over England in 1066, where did he come from? He wasn't born in England, didn't even speak English. He was born in France. He's born in Normandy, right? In Normandy, in northern France. And that starts the connection between the rivalry between France and England, okay? And as we've talked about with the rise of Henry II and his Queen Eleanor and the French King Louis VII and their children, right? Richard I, and then finally John Lackland. We start in the 1200s, and this goes all the way into the 1300s, this confrontation, I guess, a nice way of saying it, of a series of wars between England and France over territorial positions in France, okay? The English are fighting to expand what they already have. The French are fighting to take back what they say is theirs. The English are fighting to take back what the French took back. The French are fighting to take back what was taken back, okay? Does that make sense? All right. And a little thing like the Black Death and disease is not going to stop them. Even in regular times when there's no Black Death floating around, disease is still rampant, okay? Disease is still rampant throughout armies, okay? You don't want to get into a big siege around a city because you're going to be sitting there for months and months and months. A big walled city with like a big castle, you're going to be sitting there for months and months waiting for their food supplies to run out or their water to run out. And in the meantime, your army is going to develop disease, usually simple diseases like dysentery or measles or smallpox, or not smallpox because that's from the New World, syphilis, things like that. But you want more power, and so these series of wars, which not culminate but put them all together. And it's over 100 years of war, so you get what's called the 100 Years' War, which is a series of smaller wars that go on and off for about 100 years, about a century, between England and France. Well, these wars devastate an already devastated countryside. You've got people that are reeling from the Great Famine. You got people that are, they focus too much on monoculture, so they run out of food. You've got people that, they're already dealing with the effects of the Black Death. And then all of a sudden, here comes an army of 20,000 Englishmen. And what do the English do? Well, this is way before, remember, standing armies. So it's not like there's a department of the army in England. The king takes people. That's still same feudal tradition. He has his dukes raise an army. He has his barons raise an army. And he gets men, he gets knights, everything else. He sticks them on ships. This costs a lot of money, but then he expects when he gets to France, guess what? The French countryside is going to provide for his troops. He's not bringing over ship after ship of grain for them. They're going to live off the countryside. Well, when an army does that, it means that the civilians suffer because they're taking everything from the civilians. They don't care. There's no such thing as, as a rule of law or Geneva Convention, anything like that. And so these, and it's not just the English, the French are doing it too to their own people. And then the French are notorious for hiring mercenaries from other countries. So do you think that, some mercenary from Italy gives two, what's about, a French peasant? Doesn't care. And so they're running roughshod over these poor people, especially in the French countryside. They ravage one little tiny village, and then they move on and they do the same thing, and they're fighting and killing each other, and then a year goes by and the same thing happens again because one king developed another army and they're at each other's throats again, over and over again. This happens for about 100 years, and just depredations against the local population. Okay, we see the rise. So in Europe at this time, we've been seeing the rise in technology, right? And the rise in political thought and new ideas like guilds and new identity. We're also seeing the expansion of trade routes and everything else like that. We're seeing the expansion of new technology throughout a ton of these places, including, with a ton of things, including the expansion of technology when it comes to the military or weaponization. My dog came home. Different technologies that are, because we're really good as humans. We've been doing this for a long time, devising new ways on killing each other faster, killing more people at the same time, only having one person do the work of 10 people to kill more people, and so on. You get the idea. But in the 1300s, we start to see the rise of a new weapon that hits the battlefield. called the crossbow. Okay, called the crossbow. The crossbow was an extremely deadly weapon. It had limitations, but it had also it made a huge impact on a battlefield. To a large degree, regular bows could not penetrate the thick armor of knights. Okay, just they were too weak. They would dent and they would hurt you, but it wouldn't puncture. We don't get until we get to like the rise of the English longbow, a big giant bow that is much bigger than the regular composite bow, and it has much more tension and strength, and you can pull it back, you can shoot that arrow a lot farther, and those can puncture. But the only people that really have those in large quantities are the English, and they're trained to use them. But in Europe, we see a new weapon that comes out, and it's the crossbow. So the crossbow obviously doesn't use an arrow, it uses what's called a bolt or a quarrel. It's a much smaller type of arrow. It's stuck in there, and the amount of tension that is required for the crossbow is usually too much by hand. There's two different types of crossbows. One has a little, almost like a little metal stirrup at its front. So the crossbowman would stick his foot, he would stick his foot in the crossbow, hold it there, and then you take two hands and you pull it back and you draw it back and you put it over a little hook. Okay, now it's super tight. You stick your quarrel in there, you bring it up, and then you have a rudimentary trigger. Okay, not something fancy like you see now, but up here, and all it does is you unleash the hook. It releases the tension, and the crossbow quarrel goes flying. Other ones were so hard and so powerful, so thick, as you can see right here. You see this? This man literally has a machine. Okay, one of the first instances of machinery in civilization, because it's attached right here. It's too much power for him to even stick his foot there and pull it back, so he's using a machine to do it. There's a little series of clamps there. He puts the string on one end. He uses the handle, he uses the machinery to hold it in place as it slowly gets pulled up, and then he flips it up onto the last little part onto his trigger, and so on. The benefit of these is that they could puncture armor, thick armor. They can kill them off really quickly, even at night. And you don't have to be a knight to control one. They're pretty simple. You can grab pretty much anybody out of a village, give them a quick 10-minute listen, stick your foot here, pull this up here, and shoot the knight really quickly. The drawback is that number one, it takes a while to produce these. You can't just mass produce them. And the biggest drawback is that they're very slow. It takes a long time to load them, and the person is completely open if they're loading their crossbow. They're not doing much. Hey, how's it going, buddy? Get out of here. So there's that. So we have the 100 Years' War, and it culminates in the 1300s. Like I said, that obviously is not very good for these people already reeling from problems. Now, excuse me. In the 100 Years' War, and this is what we'll finish off on in the last 5 minutes. In the 100 Years' War, right, we see the battle between England and France. And for the longest time, France is not doing well. They're struggling. They cannot, every major battle in the 100 Years' War, up to a certain point, is won by the English. The English just have, better trained troops. They have better leaders. Things are not going well for the French, and they're losing more territory than they're gaining over and over and over again. One of the big ones, so like if you know your Shakespeare, there's several great battles that the English fight between the English. So you have like the Battle of Poitiers, and then culminating in the 1400s with the Battle of Agincourt. And the reason why the English win these is basically on the back of those bowmen, those English longbows. The French have, as they've always had, the heart of chivalry in France. They have the most knights. They have the most highly trained knights. But a knight is only as good as when he can get to the battle. And if you have even 100 of these longbowmen, these English longbowmen, just filling the air with these arrows from over 200 yards away, The English or the French knights can't get there, and they get decimated. They get destroyed in the saddle because these longbowmen can put arrows through them quickly, and it can go through their heavy armor, goes through the armor of their horses, everything else, and so they just get decimated. So the French are reeling; they're not doing really well. The the prince at the time, the French prince at the time, his father is very weak. We're talking about the early 1300s. Is Charles VII. He will become king of France, but right now at that point he's called the Dauphin, or the French prince, and he's looking for anything that is going to help him, win some battles against these English, because he's losing support. He has no money. The English are in control of Paris, so he's been pushed out of his own capital. He and his father. Well, he gets that help in the guise of this person here. And this person is the least likeliest person that somebody would have considered to be a hero of the French. This person's name is Joan of Arc. Okay, Joan of Arc. So Joan of Arc, or and that's the English version of her name, Joan, but in French it's Jeanne of Arc, is she's a peasant girl. She's a nobody. She's this 17-year-old teenage girl. She's a girl. She's 17 years old. She comes from a common family there in north central France. And she is deeply religious from a very young age, from when she's a child. She believes she has these visions, and these visions come from God, and God is telling her, you are going to be the one. There's something special about you. You're going to be the one that's going to help lead your people, the French, to victory against the English. You're going to be the one to help anoint the new king. You're going to be the person to do this. And according to tradition, she starts to get a following. People start believing in her. But there's plenty of religious people, like, even back then, they're considered fanatics, where people are like, yeah, right, you have vision. He has a vision. Everybody has a vision. But she starts to get a little devout following, where people are like, there's something going on with this girl. She's got something up here. She knows. And she's doing things that are proving this. And so by the time she's 17, she's made a name for herself, and her name actually makes it to the court of the Dauphin, of Charles VII. He plays a little trick. He says, I want to see this girl. I want to know what's happening. She says she can lead the armies, which would be unheard of, a woman leading an army. But she says she can do something that will help us. And he plays a little trick. He basically says to his court, I'll switch clothes with one of my just regular guys. And if she truly is, sent by God, she will know. She will know that this is a trick. She will know who the real prince is. So he does. He switches clothes, and so she walks in, and everybody's like, oh my goodness, because she's a teenage girl, she's a teenage girl. She's wearing men's clothes, which is a huge no-no. You cannot do that. If you're a woman, you are to wear a dress, but it doesn't matter. She's wearing trousers and a regular, shirt. And she immediately walks up to, this guy in these fancy robes, and everybody's kind of snickering, like, oh, see what happens? She's just another weirdo. Well, she looks at this guy for a little bit, according to the sources, what they say, then she goes, no, you're not him. You're not the one I'm supposed to be helping. And everybody's like, oh my goodness. And she winds around and she finds the prince in disguise, and she bows to him and she tells him, Your Highness, I'm here to help. And he's like, whoa, oh my goodness. So she literally does become not just a figurehead. She's not just a person that, is, oh, look, here's this new thing that we're using to rally the troops. She becomes a warrior. A special armor is made for her. So once again, she was wearing men's clothes, and now she's wearing armor, which is also a huge no-no. Women are not allowed to use armor. She cuts her hair short. Okay, she has long hair. She cuts her hair short, which is also a huge no-no. And she's out there leading the French troops. And and she wins several victories, like at the Siege of Orleans. She wins there. She rallies these French troops, these French leaders, you know. So it's amazing that, you know, here's this young girl, and there's, you know, French generals sitting there listening to her, like, well, what do you want to do next? What should we do? And she's like, I want to take the fight to England. And she does. She wins battle after battle against against the English. And at first, the English, like, you know, really, guys, this is what you got left, huh? Okay, all right, let's see what this little girl can do. And then she starts winning, and well, this pisses them off, and this upsets them all the way to the point where it makes it all the way back to the King of England, and he sets things in motion. And what happens is, after about 2 years of this, she's captured. She's through treachery. She's turned over to a group of Frenchmen, which they're French, but they're not French. They're Burgundians, okay, like where we get the wine, and they owe allegiance to the French king, but they're kind of like a power within themselves. They do their own thing. She is captured by through treachery to these Burgundians. The Burgundians give her over to the English, and the English want to just get rid of her. But the church steps in and says, well, we don't want to just kill her. Because remember, she's considered a what? A heretic, okay? And as we talked about, the church is not in the habit of just killing heretics willy-nilly. Now, this is an important heretic. This is not just some crazy person walking around the street saying, I'm, you know, the son of God or something like that. This is a person that's caused a lot of problems for the English. So there's a lot of pressure on the church. The church is basically telling her, look, just confess that everything you said was nonsense. Just confess that you didn't get visions from God. Just confess that you aren't like the messenger from God or something like that, and that you're just a girl that made up some stories and you won't be killed. Well, we don't know, because we can't go look in Joan of Arc's mind. But to her, she believed that she had received these visions, that she was the messenger, and that she was the person that was ordained by God to come and help save the French crown. And so she's handed over to the English authorities, and they burn her at the stake. They burn her alive with the charge of heresy. She's burned as a witch. And they bring all these other things up in her case against her, like she wore men's clothes, she wore men's armor, she claimed to speak to God, all this stuff, and they use that against her, and they burn her. And she's become and rightly so, a heroine in French history. She did not live, she was only 19 when she was finally executed. She did not live to see France take back all their possessions, but the importance of her, who she was, and by the sheer force of her personality, helped stir the French to a point where they were able to finally stand toe-to-toe with the English. And over many more decades, the English were eventually almost completely expelled from the continent. All of the old lands that Henry II had and William the Conqueror, all goes to France eventually. Like I said, this happens way after she is gone. But she is extremely important in French history, not just medieval history, but the history of the French as, the identity of the French, okay? And so much so that she is canonized by the Roman Catholic Church. She was made a saint, Saint John, by the church. I think like in the 1920s, they canonized her and made her a saint. And so according to Catholic Church, everything that she did and everything that she said that happened to her did happen. Okay, now whether it did, I don't know. Did she get visions from God? I don't know. Was she truly sent as a messenger from God? I don't know. But they believe so, and like I said, she's extremely important in the history of French culture and how it goes. Okay, so you guys are going to be watching some videos along with this, including something about Joan of Arc, which I think is really good. But to wrap up, folks, we talked about the rise of urban centers, right? The building of cities and how they are becoming more and more important. And this keeps going on. So this was 700 years ago. This is how it is now. Our biggest cultural centers, usually in any country, are located in the cities, obviously. And remember, with the cities, we have specialization of labor, okay? Multiple people doing all these different things. you're finding anonymity and you're finding identity at the same time, okay? We see for the first time this new group of people in the far east at this point, the Mongols rise up and they start causing a whole lot of problems to the people in Asia, Africa, and especially Europe. We see the rise of this new theological discussion that is a discussion between reason and faith, and that is scholasticism, right? So if you're a theologian in the Middle Ages in the year 1300, you're most likely going to be trying to prove the existence of God by using reason, by using the age-old philosophies from the Greeks and Romans. We talked about the rise of the guilds, and by the rise of the guilds, we start seeing the rise of, for the first time, the middle class, a new section of people. Without the guilds, you do not have a middle class. Without the middle class, you don't have the type of society we have now. People at the top, people in the middle, and people at the bottom. That's how it's been ever since, okay? So the rise of the guilds, all the reasons why you should be part of a guild, and all the reasons why, guilds were, encouraged and why they wanted them around. We saw the rise of the banking system as well. So once again, as much as we go, oh, geez, you do need banks. You do need banks in a modern economy. They needed banks even then, 700 years ago, for all the different things that you need banks for investment, for holding your money, for loans and all that stuff, okay? We finally see how that three-crop farming system has been working well for a long time, and all of a sudden it doesn't work so well because we see the introduction of, the problems of monoculture when you're growing things to just sell it rather than eat it. And that's going to be one of the ramifications of the Black Death as well too, that we'll talk about next week. Okay, we also saw the problems that hit almost one after another throughout the 1300s. We saw the Little Ice Age hit, which helped lead to the Great Famine. So we have millions of people dying from that disease that lasts around 7 years, where crops aren't growing, where crops are dying, and people are running out of food. We also see devastating wars, right? Where, especially between the English and French, fighting over the same countryside they've been fighting over for a long time. And of course, the regular people, the common people, get caught in the middle. We also see the introduction of, what happens when the Mongols are doing stuff over in the East and it affects people in the West. We're seeing the first incidences of what happens when you have not a global economy, but when entire regions are now connected to one another, so that if something happens here, it's going to affect something that happens here, or vice versa. And so we see that with those Mongol incursions. And then the biggest one, folks, is that we see the rise of the Black Death. Okay, plagues have been around since the beginning of time, but this one was different. This one was huge. This one affected an entire populations. Nobody was saved from it, rich, poor. It didn't matter what God you believed in. It didn't matter, what type of climate you were in. If you're in the desert, if you're in the forest, doesn't matter. You could be affected by the Black Death. They did not know about why it started or where it started or how to treat it, anything like that. If you survived, it was basically luck of the draw. Your immune system was just able to survive it, and so on. But we're going to be talking about those ramifications next week. So that wipes out a ton of people. It's a huge life-changing, event-changing, society-changing thing that happened in the mid-1300s. And then finally, with the wars, we talked about the rise of special peoples like Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, who helps lead her countrymen to victory against those evil English overlords. Okay, but that's what we got for today, folks. I think we only have like 2 more weeks of talks, and then we're gonna be done. We got our final project and our final paper. So there we go. I guess I will see you next week. Stay safe and wash your hands still, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.